All right, bosses, I think it's likely this month that you've learned that for every pound of practical business experience and inspiration I bring to this space and have brought for years, it is paired with and has always been paired with a pound of very receptive, intuitive energy that really makes it next level possible for me and how I operate to show up and do the work. In the last episode, I gave both a bird's eye view of times in my business when I let intuition drive the bus, bringing to life some crazy ideas that have equated to the largest moves I've made in my creative career, and some insight into an energetic practice that keeps me free to show up just as myself. And this week, I'm sharing with you a peek into my favorite magical modality as I have a conversation with a guest who's an author, a creative business boss, and a pro on the topic of astrology. Welcome to Being Boss, a podcast for creatives, business owners, and entrepreneurs who want to take control of their work and live life on their own terms. I'm your host, Emily Thompson. And I think we can all agree that astrology's been having a moment for about a decade plus. And it's only intensifying. Though knowing your sign has been a thing for several generations, it now feels like the whole world is on board with bewaring Mercury retrogrades and eclipses. I talk about this trendiness of astrology with today's guest, Mecca Woods, along with a dive into how the planets can act as a mirror of the luck and divine timing that make running a business quite a bit more magical. I'm very excited to introduce you to Mecca, a New York City-based astrologer and author. Her horoscopes and expertise have been featured in places like Bustle, Refinery29, Essence, TLC, and BuzzFeed. She also teaches workshops around the country and abroad on personal development and astrology, and co-hosts the astrology podcast Stars on Fire. Her books, Astrology for Happiness and Success, and the Cosmic Coloring book series are available now wherever books are sold. This interview with Mecca was recorded earlier this month in front of a live virtual audience as a part of our Guided by Intuition gathering, which will soon be available for replay within the Clubhouse tier of the Being Boss community. And because how could I not, be sure to hang around to the end of this episode where I ask Mecca for a bit of a horoscope for us creative business folks as we wrap up the year that is 2020, in case you're into that kind of thing. Now, before we dive in, here's a word from our sponsor. I just want to take a minute to shout out to all the small business owners out there. It's hard work balancing your bottom line and taking care of your team. That's why Gusto built an easier and more affordable way to manage payroll, benefits, and more. Automatic payroll tax filing, simple direct deposits, free health insurance administration, 401ks, onboarding tools, you name it, Gusto made it simple. And right now, you can get 3 months free once you run your first payroll. Just go to gusto.com/beingboss. That's gusto.com/beingboss. Hello, Mecca.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, and everyone here. Super excited about having this conversation with you. We've been chatting together over the past day about so many things, but we haven't been able to really dive into your story yet. So I am very excited about diving in, and we're doing it in front of our live audience of bosses who have
bosses.
Right? They've all started getting in, right? Okay, I do have to say, Mecca is wearing the most fabulous pair of glasses, and her earrings are so on point.
Thank you.
I love it. I'm excited to be here with all of our bosses. We're going to be diving in with Mecca in a way that we haven't really been able to for the past couple of days. Mecca has joined us for a breakout session and a couple of panels, but this conversation is just you and I, and we're going to talk about you and your journey, but also astrology. Because I do have to say that we have had lots of woo bosses on the podcast before. But for whatever reason, we've never had an astrologer.
Okay.
I don't know, astrology, I've told you, is one of my favorite woo practices or modalities, or I'm totally in there. But we haven't had an astrologer yet. So welcome, first boss astrologer.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right. To get us started, I would love for you to share with us a bit about your journey, both in astrology, but also entrepreneurially. So
Yeah.
what has led you to be you now?
I guess the best way I could describe that is kind of based off a conversation that my mom and I had recently. And she kind of came up to me out of the blue and she was like, she's like, I've been thinking about you a lot. And I realized like, you're the kind of woman that doesn't take no for an answer. She was like, you don't really for people to tell you no. And I feel like that really kind of sums up like who I am in terms of like my career choices, how I became an astrologer. I always wanted to have a job where I could positively impact the world around me. I have a very like I guess altruistic spirit in that regard in terms of like wanting to do things. And at first I thought it was going to be through like fiction writing. Like I thought I was going to do it like through the publishing, which, full circle, I did end up doing it with my book and my horoscopes. Like, so it did kind of come together in that regard in some way. But for me, I didn't find astrology until about, it's been about 10 years now, little over a decade ago. And I was working in a nonprofit and working, helping people, doing what I wanted in that regard. But I just felt very blocked and very stuck and kept having like, butting heads with management and just and being in these positions where I was just constantly made to feel smaller than what I was. And that just kind of really rubbed me really wrong. And I was kind of like, what should I be doing? I don't know, feeling like very like at this crossroads. And that's where astrology kind of entered my life because I went for a reading. And it was funny because like, I was still, even with the work that I do, like sometimes I'm still a little bit skeptical. Well, like, is this really going to work? Like, what is she going to tell me? And, she blew me away. Like the astrologer, having that very first astrology reading, like she really blew me away and was able to tell me stuff about the things that she wouldn't have known otherwise, without looking at my birth chart. And that was the thing that really hooked me, that just kind of set the wheels in motion. And so what had happened, I just started to research and read and pouring all over the internets and the blogs and the chats and just just trying to find out everything that I could find out about astrology and my chart. And it just so happened that around that same time, things at work became really, really toxic at that point. And I was on the verge, like every other week I would be like, I'm quitting, I'm quitting. But I couldn't work up the courage at that time because I was like, I'm a single mom, I didn't have another giant job lined up, even though I was interviewing for jobs, but they weren't coming through for whatever reason. The universe must have known that like, no, this is not your thing. But it was just this kind of like perfect storm of just being unhappy and then also just kind of being like, what else is there? Like to sit and suffer, or do I, shore up my courage and actually take a leap and actually leave this place and do something that's more enjoyable. So what happened was, as I started to become more interested in astrology, I ended up also finding a mentor who taught me everything that she knew about astrology from the business perspective, from like the technical sense and everything of that nature. And she was one who really helped me to see that I could actually make a legitimate business out of it. Because I think one of the things for me was like getting over some of the stigma around it of like, because people used to call me Miss Cleo,
Yes.
They used to call me Miss Cleo and they used to like make jokes and things of that nature. But it was something that I was really like interested. But by the way, reading about Miss Cleo, like she's actually a boss, herself. Like she was actually a boss herself. So now I take it as a compliment, when people make jokes like that. But yeah, people used to like, he was like, oh, but they were also blown away at the fact that I could read them very well. And that I actually had a gift for it. And that was the thing that also kind of kept me going, because I was like, no, there's something to this. Like, I actually am doing this pretty well. And so, long story short, I found my mentor. I quit the job finally, because everything I just kind of blew up that part of my life. I ended up moving back home with my mom, because my mom, she's definitely, like, both my parents are very supportive. Like, you don't have to take anyone's shit. Like, you don't, like, if you need a place to stay, like, come in. I packed up my daughter. We moved back in. I took a couple of side jobs for a little while, working in like customer service, just to have like an income while I was building up my practice. And eventually, I started to write for Bustle. Like, it just started to like grow. Like, the more I would say, like, the more I like didn't take no for an answer, and the more I just kind of like believed in myself and believed in like this path that I was on, the more things started to open up for me. And eventually it became a full-time practice where I became a full-time astrologer.
There are so many pieces of this that I want to dive into. That is such not to discredit by any way your experience, but this is mirrored in so many boss stories that I hear where like things just start falling together. Like, you're met with some difficulty, you find this thing that's helpful, you obsessively dive into it, someone walks into your life that's going to help you, and then the world just kind of opens up. Yeah. Which I think is something that I want to dive into. But I also want to ask, you talk about getting that first reading. So work is difficult. Mm-hmm. You're looking for answers. Mm-hmm. Why was it an astrology reading? Do you like have any recollection of why that was the way you needed to like get the help that you needed?
Yeah, so it was actually a twofold kind of situation. So it was work. My work life wasn't working, and also my love life wasn't working. And it just so happened that the astrologer. So how I found the astrologer and got the reading was I picked up her book first, and it was an astrology book about like love and relationships, because I was trying to figure like why am I constantly running into the same pattern, and why attracting the same kind of person over and over again, and all of that. And so I had loved what she had to say in the book so much that I was like, well, let me get, and I saw that she was offering readings like, in on her website. And I was just like, oh, well, let me check it out and let me see, if there's anything to this. And so I went open, but I also was kind of like, all right, is this, like, what is she going to tell me, kind of thing. And like I said, like she was able to look at my chart and explain it in a way that felt empowering. And I think that was the thing about astrology that really drew me in, because I felt like astrology gives you the tools for you to kind of put yourself in the driver's seat, and not feel like you're the victim of like unforeseen forces or circumstances. So like, even when things that, are tough or like outside of our control, right? Astrology can show us like how to navigate those things and how to weather the storm if we have to batten down the hatches, and kind of say, and can also give us like a timeline, and say like, okay, for the next 6 months, we know things are going to be a bit rocky or shaky. All right, let's try to just like do the best that we can to kind of get through this tough period. But I know that there's a light at the end of this tunnel, right? And so with that kind of being armed with that kind of knowledge, was really crucial for me, because it really helped me to kind of plan and kind of like, and also validate why I was feeling the way that I was feeling, like that. I think that's the thing too, that when it comes to astrology, why people are so turned on to it and why people look to it during times of uncertainty, because they want to be able to feel validated. Like, there's so many people that I talk to, the clients that I have on like one-on-one basis, and I tell them things like, no, you're supposed to be on this path, or no, you're supposed to be this, or no, like, like don't. a lot of my conversations are around like telling people like not to take no for an answer too, like no for an answer when it comes to dealing with the world at large, and also like being mindful of telling themselves no, when it comes to certain things. And so, yeah, like that, I think astrology, because it showed me how to unpack who I was, and like how to like work with what I have and like turn that up times 1,000 to get, to get where I wanted to go. That was the thing that drew me in.
I love what you're talking about there, because I've several pieces of this I agree with everything, but several pieces of this really stand out to me. One of which being that light at the end of the tunnel. Like there's timelines that astrology gives you that allows you to really see that there are ends to hard times, right? Like,
right.
And I have connected to that before, for sure. Being able to see, like, I feel like shit right now. or whatever, but like
right.
This is not my life. Like this is
right.
just Pluto sitting on me.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So I think that's really huge. That has always, I've found that sort of external validation of my own feelings and that light at the end of the tunnel very important, and is one of the reasons why I love astrology. But I also love what you're saying here around, at least at the moment, one of the things that you find yourself doing a lot is telling people not to take no for an answer. Right. And the thing that I find super interesting here is that astrology can help us with whatever like conditioning or deconditioning we need to do around whatever is happening in the modern world, because the themes in astrology are timeless.
Right.
So those timeless themes, it doesn't matter like what the problem is of the moment.
Right.
Astrology will always help pull you out of it, because those themes traverse all times and all conditions. And at the moment, the thing is, don't take no for an answer. But it makes me wonder, like, what was the thing that all the astrologers were saying in the 80s or in the 60s? Because I bet it has shifted through each decade or generation, but astrology is always there sort of holding this equilibrium of like, here's how the world needs to function. Here's how humans need to get out of their own way, whatever it is, however it is, whenever it is. I find that truly fascinating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, that's a conversation that I find myself having with a lot of folks who always want to know, like, well, how are you guys making the predictions? And like, is there really anything to this? And, talking to people who might be a little bit skeptical, which of course I encounter over the course of my, my work. But my thing is like, it's not that we're like pulling things out of the air. We're just looking at the patterns. We're looking at the past, right? And we're saying like, if these kind of conditions, these planetary conditions were existing back, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, hundreds of years ago, right? And it's happening again because everything, is a cycle, right? Everything kind of comes around full circle at some point or another. I have a friend, my friend Janelle Belgrave, who's also an astrologer. She always talks about how, we live in a closed circuit. Nothing is ever really happening, at random. And so when we talk about that in context to, timing and time and things of that nature, it's all very cyclical, and so we can use that to kind of look back and say, okay, this was going on, and we can learn from the past. We can try not to make the same mistakes that we've made in the past, and try to choose differently. But yeah, like a lot of the things, the themes and, issues and things like that, like these are not new things, that we're dealing with, but the astrology can give us a tool in terms of like how to make new choices, or handle things in a new or a different way. So that's where, I feel like there's that intersection, where it comes to like the past and the present and the future, and like trying to like condensing the timeline in some way.
Right? Tasha over here is mirroring this, saying that astrology on its surface is exactly the thing that gives me the relief that everything is cyclical. Things ebb and flow, and nothing lasts forever, good or bad.
Right. Absolutely.
Totally agree with that. Okay, I do want to go back to your story just a little bit. Because one of the things that you were talking about is this idea that, your job was getting real sucky.
Yes.
You were not happy with it.
Right.
You ended up getting this reading, and not only getting this reading, but like almost gaining an obsession. Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
At this time as well, you met this mentor that helped you sort of navigate the switch. It sounds like divine timing, right?
Yeah. And I, when I look back at the transits, the planet, like what was going on, for my chart at the time, it was absolutely divine timing. Back then, which is interesting because we're having sort of the inverse, like this, like, so like sometimes like, so how can I explain it? So back when I decided I wanted to become an astrologer, we were having an eclipse cycle on the Gemini and Sagittarius axis. So eclipses, we were talking a little about them yesterday. I was telling people not to charge, their crystals underneath them. But eclipses are game changers. Like they force us to grow and they force us to evolve. And when they hit your sun, because your sun is your identity, your sun is your energy, your sun is who you are authentically, right? And your ability to feel comfortable in your skin. When eclipses land on your sun, it forces you to be like, where am I dulling my shine? Where am I living inauthentically, and where do I need to start, being the real me? And so when that was happening back then, it really forced me to level up and say, like, I'm not happy where I am. I don't feel like I'm utilizing my talents. I feel, taken for granted. I feel small. Like it just like the way the astrology, the way the stars aligned for me back then definitely showed me that I needed to step it up, and I think that's the thing with astrology too. Like, it shows you the work that you need to do and the ways in which you need to show up for yourself. And it can give you the guideline, or like the blueprint on how to do that. And so where I was talking about like how we're sort of in a similar pattern. So like, we started the Gemini and Sagittarius eclipses again. So over the next, 18 months, us Sages and Virgos and Pisces and Gemini influenced people, we're going to be coming up for new changes, again. So yeah, definitely everything kind of came together. It is definitely a perfect storm.
Knowing things like this eclipse season coming up and that it is on the same axis, though opposite of what it was previously.
Right.
How does that make you feel? Do you get like, does it make you anxious? Are you glad you know? Do you wish you didn't know? Like, how do you feel about like having this sort of insight?
It's sometimes a gift and a curse to know.
Right.
Sometimes I do, like when it comes to different things, sometimes I do at times need to kind of take the astrologer's hat off a little bit and just kind of allow myself to lean into whatever the energy is coming out without necessarily having to have every step planned and plotted out, and I would say that that's been a big theme for 2020. It's definitely going to be a theme for 2021 for all of us when it comes, because there's a lot more changes ahead. I mean, there's always change. Like change is the only constant, I think. But yeah, just like this ability to be curious and to be open, to be, to have some plans in place, but to not be so fixated on certain outcomes or so rigid in our approach that we don't allow the room for the flexibility. And that's very Gemini and Sagittarius. We're the mutable signs, of the zodiac: Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces. We go with the flow and kind of adapt to the situation at hand. And that, I would say, is probably going to be the best approach that all of us, are going to need to take going forward, because things are going, you see it now, like every other day, there's an interesting twist or a turn. We haven't even gotten out of 2020 yet. So I think in terms of, like knowing things and being plugged in, it is helpful, but I also try not to, like, I try to, there's a fine line that I walk. And then I also kind of like encourage people, like, don't lean too heavily on the astrology either. Like there definitely has to be an ability to kind of like go with the flow and trust what's happening without needing to know every single step that's coming up. Because also sometimes you just can't, like sometimes, I see things and I'm just like, I don't know what that means. We'll see when it happens, like sometimes you have to be very honest too about that kind of situation. But yeah.
For sure. I
Yeah.
definitely heard of astrologers who have to take breaks from their work, who have to like not read any more charts or not look and see what's happening because they just need to like just go with their own flow. And I would imagine that diving in, especially as often as like a professional astrologer does, would sometimes require that like turning off of like,
absolutely.
just not. And if someone is sort of obsessed with reading their horoscopes, right, there can be a sort of giving over of your power of your own life when you are leaning into them a little bit too much.
Right. Yeah. Like I have had, some situations where I've had people email me when they didn't see their horoscope or didn't get their horoscopes. And I was just like, on one hand, I'm flattered, like, right. I'm like, and this happened last year because I had an injury where I had a fall and broke my wrist, so I couldn't write. And people were emailing me like, "Hey, where's the horoscopes?" And I had to be like, "I broke my wrist. There's a human being behind these horoscopes. Like I broke my wrist. I injured myself." And they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." But I'm like, guys. This is not the end all or be all. I promise you. I promise. Like it's okay to live your life without necessarily, having the knowing either. So
for sure. Okay, I do want to pick your brain a little bit for someone who is not as familiar with astrology. Or someone who, maybe who doesn't read horoscopes though? Like who has not at some point in their life picked up, like even my dad will sometimes go through and read horoscopes or, talk to me about them on the phone. It's very funny. And he doesn't put any stock into those kinds of things, but they're so accessible that really literally everyone has read theirs, I'm sure, at some point or another. But I would love to hear from you if you have this on top of your mind, like how does it work? Like what is happening with the planets that like affects, like in your words, what is the magic that is happening that causes a transit to do something, or like when Pluto is sitting on your sun or whatever it may be, like how is that working?
So I guess the best way that I can describe it, it kind of goes in alignment with that phrase, as above, so below. So I think that, as human beings living here on this planet, we're a part of the natural order or the natural cycle, of life, and that also includes whatever's going on in the heavens or, out there in the universe. And so when we talk about like, planets, things in the horoscopes when you're having a transit, I tell people that it's not so much that the planet is necessarily doing anything to you. It's just that it's providing a language for what is going on in your life. It's providing some context, in terms of what's going on in your life. And so as astrologers, what we're doing is we're looking at the cycles of these planets, right? And we're looking at our own, and using those cycles to define our own, basically. And so when we talk about like, Pluto is, fighting with the moon or, eclipses or whatever, we're just giving a language to what is happening. You basically using like the natural, order of life essentially. And so I think when people are thinking about horoscopes or thinking about planets, it's important to know that we do have some free will, we do have some choice in terms of what happens to us. And like I said, like, even for the things that are outside of our control or things that we can't necessarily, do anything about, the astrology can give us some tool or some language on like how to, like, what's happening. First of all, like, okay, why do I feel, this way? Why is this happening? But then also say, okay, this is how you get through this.
Around Being Boss, we don't care if you're reading astro charts, designing websites, or coaching people on how to be a better public speaker. We just want you to make money doing work you love. There's two key things there. You got to focus on doing work you love, and you have to make money. Finding the work you love is up to you, and my recommendation is that you try a lot of things and find something that lights you up and makes money. And when it comes to that money part, there's a little simple business truth that works real well here, no matter what you're slinging. Always be collecting. which today means send your invoices, which is why we love FreshBooks Cloud Accounting. They make it easy for you to get paid. Join FreshBooks today and get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to freshbooks.com/beingboss and enter Being Boss in the How Did You Hear About Us section. I think that's such a great definition. And I'll even say I've used, can we talk about my Saturn return?
Yes.
Because this, for me, my Saturn return was probably my first intro into astrology. I remember one of my clients even was like, she was like, how old are you? And I was like, oh, 27. And she's like, oh, your Saturn return's coming or something. And I was like, what are you even talking about?
Right.
And so I go and I Google it and I'm totally entranced. I read all about it. And I discover that this is like some, it could be some amazing upheaval that could really define who it is that I become next, like all of these things. And I remember reading that and seeing it as an opportunity. Right? Of like, yes, I could just like stay. I could do nothing for sure. I can also take this whole like bit of divine timing, if you want, this like little bit of luck that I've like had this has been brought to my consciousness at just the right time, that I have the ability to gain the awareness as to what transit is happening, that I can actually take it into my own hands. And I very consciously rearranged my life into more of what it is that I wanted it to be. Whereas, oftentimes, and even the things that I was reading around Saturn returns, everything was like, it's a very trying time. It's going to be so difficult, like all these things. And I was like, oh yeah, let's see what kind of fun I can have. And I ended up just changing how it was that I was working, where it was that I lived, how it is that I lived. Like I initiated a complete upheaval and rearrangement of my life that really set me on more of an aligned path, because I knew it was coming, if that makes sense. So that's even another way how you can use it. I don't love the word empowerment, and anyone here who's like subscribes to the newsletter, you've potentially read. I probably should turn it into a blog post or an episode, because I do have this very sincere issue with the word empowerment. But I think because of the world we live in, for me, having that knowledge empowered me, right? To make changes, to see this as a time that could be like divinely aligned with making some shifts in my life that I needed to do. So I will say, like, there is this as above, so below, that is a little bit, that can be very just cause and effect, but you can also be the cause that causes the effect with this sort of inner knowing and outer knowing of what's happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I absolutely believe that we co-create with the universe, that we're co-creators. Absolutely. And I think that, that it's important, like, astrology kind of shows us how we can be, and how we can, do that as best as we possibly can, based on our gifts, based on our talents, based on who we are, just, innately. And, my Saturn return also was kind of like the catalyst for me in terms of like becoming an astrologer, like shortly after my Saturn return was funny, because I got a promotion at the job that I hated and was making more money and, doing all this. And then suddenly I realized, I was like, I actually hate this, like I actually am not happy here. And it was funny because where I was having my Saturn return, it was going through both my my first house, which is all about my self-image, right? And how I'm interacting with the world. And then it started to go through my second house, which is the zone that has to do with like your values, and your income, and like what you feel is most important to you, including like, your worth. And Saturn was like, are you sure you're happy? Like, this is what you really want? And I was like, no. And Saturn, pushed me, to do that work. And that's kind of like a thing too, like when we talk about like the difficult transits, or the difficult, astrology, you can let go, or you can be dragged, you have an option.
That is such a good, that's, you can let go or be dragged 100%.
Right.
You have
Right.
the choice. You have the
Right.
choice. Wonderful. Okay. So I want to go into then this idea of divine timing or luck, because I do think that those are just like other terms for lots of things,
Right.
honestly. But how do you, and maybe you even began touching on this with this idea of as above, so below, but maybe my question really is, how can we work with that? Like, what does it look like to lean into letting things happen? Do you need to be reading astrology a lot, or do you just, is there something else that you need to be doing? Like, what does it look like for you to show up for luck or put yourself in the place of luck, or otherwise like expose yourself to divine timing?
I think it's a combination of of head and heart, basically, right? So many of us, and I find myself talking about this too a lot with clients, because so many of us are split in two, like our head says one thing, our heart says another, and we can never really get them in agreement. And what I've found is that the way in which we align those two sides of us really has to do with listening to what our heart is telling us, right? So if we're not happy about something, or maybe there's something that excites us and we're like, oh, wow, look, I want to go after this thing, or I want to do this thing, then we have to get our head behind it by saying, okay, this is possible, right? Or, okay, this is the hard decision that I need to make in order for me to get to this good place, or this nice place, right? So that's usually how I see it. It's about kind of having the expectation, right, that good things can happen, or that good things can come to you, that you're deserving, that you're worthy, that life has like lots of good things to offer. And then the other side of it is actively putting in the work, right? So it kind of reminds me of this Bible verse, which I'm God, this is meta Sagittarius. I'm sorry. Because Sagittarius, we're always preaching from the pulpit somehow. Or on some magical carpet ride. But it reminds me of the idea that faith without works is dead, right? So it's like you can't have the dream, right? Or you can't have like this belief or this expectation without putting in some work behind it. And so it's kind of like a combination. So you put in the work with the expectation that work is going to pay off, or that thing is going to come true. So it kind of goes hand in hand. And that's usually like the way that I try to approach life too, because I have my moments too, where I'm like, I need this thing to happen, or I want this thing to happen, or if it doesn't happen, or whatever, or like, when is this thing, this thing going to be over? I can get quite impatient and quite willful. Again, I don't like to take no for an answer, right? But but at the same time, I'm kind of I try to practice what I preach, and I try to say that, like, if I'm doing the work, if I'm showing up, if I'm having the expectation that things will work out eventually, then that's the energy that I need to constantly like lean into. So the minute that we start, trying to control every aspect of our life, the minute that we are doubting, or being like, oh, that's not going to happen, or, oh, I shouldn't try, or, the minute that we put like fear or desperation onto things, that's usually when we're out of alignment, or we're just we're in that sort of that fractured, sort of place, but the minute that we say, no, I'm going to do the work and trust that the universe has my best interest at heart, regardless of how things turn out. Because sometimes, bad things that quote unquote bad things that happen can sometimes be blessings in disguise, you know what I mean? Or the redirect that we need in order to get back on the path, that we're supposed to be on. So, like you were saying, like, there's no such thing as like, it was good or bad, or, negative and all of that. It's just experiences, that we're having in this body, in this lifetime. And so when I think about that in context to, luck or timing, I think part of it is what we do and the energy that we're putting into things, and also the expectation of things, to come.
I agree with all of this. I often think that you make your own luck, right? Which is
Right.
very similar
Yeah.
to what you have to show up. You have to put yourself in that place. You have to put in the hours. You have to you have to be there. You have to go to luck. You have to make that journey.
Right.
You have to put yourself in a place where you can meet that mentor or get that opportunity or, meet that person, whatever it may be. Oftentimes I'll hear people like, I'm not lucky or it's never going to come to me, whatever. Usually those people are the people who are just sitting on their couch scrolling. Or whatever it may be. They're not making their own luck. They're not showing up for it. So it doesn't matter what's happening in the planets.
Right.
Or any of those things. If you're not up engaging and contributing and showing up and all of those things, nothing is going to be happening in your life. There is a co-creation. You're completely right.
Absolutely. One of my favorite examples to use with that is when people talk about, I want to find love. Okay, so what are you doing to find love? Are you going out and meeting new people? Are you, socializing? Are you doing things that are going to put you in the path of your next partner? Or are you staying home? Are you avoiding people? Are you energetically closed off, with that, because you're I don't want what has happened in the past to happen to me again, and so it's you can have all these wonderful transits, you know what I mean? Oh my God. I've looked at people's charts before and been oh my God, this is great. That's great. This is coming up. But unless you actually do something with it, it'll definitely go to waste.
For sure. Okay,
yeah.
Let's turn this then towards business, because I feel like we've set up this really great foundation of how this works and what you have to do and all of these things. But what does this mean for business? And maybe even the direction I want to take us in is what sort of things do we need to look out for? How do we need to show up? If we are looking at our horoscopes, what are those real juicy times for those creative business owners of us? What does it look like in application to your work?
Yes. So one of the things, I guess this is a perfect example. So retrogrades, for example, right? A lot of people fear retrogrades when they hear about retrogrades, Mercury or Venus or Mars is retrograde right now. Mercury is going retrograde in a couple of days. People freak out because retrogrades technically are known for making the energy very wonky, because retrogrades are for revisiting the past and not about moving forward, right? So one of the things that I tell people, especially business owners, because I think we're a different breed in the sense that we're always just trying to hit that next goal, that next target. I got to make this happen. Because if I don't make this happen, then I don't eat. We're constantly in this very forward thinking place. And I think on the one hand, it's a great thing because it gives us the ability. We have the preparation and that foresight and that the imagination, that vision. To keep moving. But, again, everything goes in a cycle. So there are times when we do need to slow down, when we do need to revisit, when we do need to go backwards a bit to kind of reorient ourselves, right? And kind of figure out, okay, should I be doing this? Does this make sense? Maybe I need to revise or update this, or, maybe this doesn't work. I just need to completely let this go. And then, when we have a clearer idea of, what the game plan is going to be, when the planets start to turn forward again, then we can start to go forward too, with a clear head and with a clear mind in terms of what we're going to do next. So I would say in terms of retrogrades, try not to fear them. The best way to work with them is to slow down and to think about what you're going to do first. Don't try not to have that FOMO, the fear of missing out. You're not really missing out on anything. And that also has to do with the timing too, right? Everything happens when it's supposed to happen, not when we necessarily think it's going to happen, right? So if you're finding yourself coming up against delays and or quote unquote missed opportunities, or things that just seem like they're not coming together when you think that they're supposed to. It probably more than likely, especially because this year has been a year full of retrogrades. Probably more than likely it's just not the right timing for it. And especially when we talk about like a Mercury retrograde, because Mercury retrogrades tend to happen a lot more frequently. They tend to be a lot more noticeable than I would say like any of the other planets. Although when Venus and Mars go retrograde, which they don't do very often, that energy tends to be also noticeable as well. But like for right now, especially as we go in deeper into, or as we're finishing out 2020, I'm like, we're deeper? No, we need to close out 2020.
Let's dig ourselves out of that hole, please.
Right. So as we close out 2020, it's really going to be important that we take it slowly, and not try to like speed through things, or, rush things, or overcommit, or even beat ourselves up because we're not at quote unquote 100%, this year in general, energetically has been incredibly tough on everyone. And I think it's important for all the bosses to have some self-compassion, and to be very gentle with ourselves, because we're all kind of going through this collective trauma, and it requires a certain amount of healing and time and space and strength and all of these things, and to get through it. And sometimes that means that you just might not be able to send out that newsletter this week. You might not be able to meet that client, tomorrow. You might not be able to get these emails out, at a certain time, or whatever the case may be. And so I would say, like, if things feel slow, if things feel frustrating, it's not going to be forever, but to really take that time to slow down and to sort of redirect your energy into some things, especially, because Mars, the Mars retrograde is going to be going on until November 13th. And Mars is energy that is about motivation, that's about like, keeping us moving essentially. And when Mars is retro, it's not a time for like that forward, hard driving momentum. It's a time for slowing down, taking a break, taking a breather, redirecting your energy into other things that might need your attention right now, as opposed to, that email or that newsletter or that, particular thing. So that's my huge advice, I think, when it comes to timing for bosses, not to force things, like sometimes we need that big glaring stop sign, in front of us, because you never know, like it can help you with taking better care of yourself. It can help you to discover something or see things in a different light that you might not have seen before. It could help you, let's say, for example, you decide not to take that client and decide instead, I'm going to meet with a therapist. That, like that meeting with the therapist could then catapult you into something else, like maybe you get some advice that you can take back into your business that can actually, help you to flourish. It really is about honoring that sort of intuitive, more receptive, more going with the flow energy, as opposed to like all of that, like very, and that's also Venus too. Like Venus is receptive. Venus is attractive. Venus doesn't fight to get what she wants because she knows that she's the shit. So it's going to come to her anyway, right? Mars is a little bit different. Mars is like, I'm going to, I'll murder people if I have to, and to get my way. And that's not to say that Mars isn't useful, because we need Mars, when it comes to like, being motivated or standing up for things, or, that kind of stuff. Like Mars helps us to get shit done. But Venus, which is kind of tied to the feminine principle, is really about letting things flow to you and letting things come to you, and not having to fight and scrap and hustle for every single thing that you get. And that really lies in that ability to kind of like take a breather, take a chill, listening to your body, doing things that are pleasurable, because when we're in a space of pleasure, that raises our magnetic, a vibration to help us like with attracting things that we want. So I would say that is where I would really go with that.
Right. And with astrology, there really is so many places you can go on any given topic.
Right.
So I think that is a beautiful set of ideas and astrological comparisons, because a couple of things. One, this idea that retrogrades are like, they're happening, right? It's happening in the planets. Why isn't it happening within us? Right? This idea of like this time when we're slowing down, we're being literally retrospected or retrospective. We're revisiting things. You mentioned like it gives us a chance to take care of ourselves. But in terms of business, like let's think about Mercury retrograde, which in a second, I would love to know if you have any thoughts around why Mercury retrogrades are so in our consciousness right now. Like, so we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But this idea of Mercury retrogrades giving us an opportunity to go back and look at our systems around how it is that we communicate. What if we literally just took Mercury retrogrades, not as a time to send newsletters, but as a time to sit back and take a look at how we've been sending newsletters and if it's actually the best way in which we need to communicate with our people. Right. We can almost use these as times to really look back and make stronger in a way the things that we're building. I will say too, Mercury retrograde too has gotten such a bad rap lately. Yeah. I was born with Mercury retrograde and I love Mercury retrograde.
I know. I was born with Mercury retrograde too.
Right. And so I love that. So too, and I think I've heard that like a quarter of the population is born under a Mercury retrograde or something, if I'm not mistaken. Like how much of a year is covered in a Mercury retrograde? A quarter, a third?
Probably a quarter, because Mercury goes retrograde about 3 times a year. So we open the year with a Mercury retrograde. Then there's a Mercury retrograde in the summer, and then there's one like in the fall, winter. So yeah.
So about a quarter of the population then is born under a retrograde, and yet we're all told to despise it. For a quarter of us, Mercury retrograde is when we can be like, we can finally communicate the most clearly.
yes. Yeah. I always like, it's always funny because when Mercury retrogrades happen, I rarely have issues, but it isn't until Mercury starts to go forward again, that's when I start to get things, because I'm naturally a Mercury retrograde person. Like that's my wheelhouse. Same. Like that's my jam. Yeah.
Same. Yeah. I often find that when Mercury is direct, especially anyone who's here who usually does live things with me, sometimes I have a hard time turning my thoughts into words, or like literally sometimes I play let's fill in Emily's blanks with the people here, and they'll like type in the words that I'm missing in the chat box because they understand what I'm saying. I just can't say it out my mouth. But during Mercury retrogrades, that's less of a thing. Like my ability to process thoughts into words is significantly better whenever Mercury is in retrograde, because that's how I am personally wired. So I will say, I would encourage everyone to like really think about your position on Mercury retrograde. Don't just take the conditioning of like modern, blog posts as to how it is that you should conduct yourselves. But I will say I still don't sign contracts under Mercury retrograde. Like I understand that in the world, Mercury is still retrograde, and I'm not going to do things like signing contracts or making big deals and those kinds of things during that time.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, I would even say too, like when it comes to contracts, like 'cause sometimes they're a little, you can't put them off. Like, like the sometimes it's pressing, like you have to sign, or you have to, make that agreement. And I would just say, just be very clear on what it is that you're signing. Like when it comes to retrogrades, especially Mercury, because Mercury is about communication and, details and facts and figures and, being very very, very clear, about what it is that you're saying and doing. And so I would just say, like, if you do find yourself having to sign, a lease or an agreement or a contract or anything of that nature during a Mercury retrograde, just make sure that you're very clear on what it is that you're signing or getting into, and that maybe that there's room for renegotiation or like an update or something like that if it comes up, if it's necessary.
Perfect. Completely agreed. But I also love that I get to work with people who all get Mercury retrograde. So there have literally been times where I'm like, literally, I'm going to sign this in like 2 weeks.
Right.
Like, I agree with everything, but just hold off. And they're like, oh yeah, Mercury's in retrograde, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, I love it. I love how, it's become a little bit more popular, for people to say like, oh, let's hold off or let's wait or let's come back to this, after the retrograde. And that makes me happy as an astrologer because I'm like, okay, now you're speaking my language.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And you're getting it's not just speaking, you're actually getting my language, which I think is wonderful. Then I would love to go back to that question then of like, why do you think that maybe horoscopes and really astrology has actually served a huge purpose in the shaping of our world, right? Mm-hmm. Like think about all of the world leaders in the past who have had astrologies as part of their support teams. And like some of them killed their astrologers once they were found out. Like that was also a thing. But it has always been such a huge part of humans like traversing the world. One, what are your thoughts around that, if you have any? And two, why do you think it's coming up so much in the consciousness now? Or maybe even like all of this woo stuff in general, tarot and crystals and all of this. But I also feel like astrology is becoming more and more accessible and approachable than ever before. And part of that being like everyone says it was Mercury in retrograde these days. Like everyone has that bit of language. Right. Why do you think it's coming up so much in the consciousness of the world at the moment?
I think it has a lot to do with how much uncertainty there is in the world right now. And I think it also has to do with the generation that's gravitating towards it, right? So we know that a lot of millennials are gravitating towards astrology and using it. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it just gives them more, like I was saying before, like it just gives you more tools to utilize, as opposed to maybe some other like traditions or faiths where it makes you feel like everything that's going on is your fault, or that you're responsible for your failures and, like you're like I said, like a victim, of some sort of unseen force, or things that are outside of your control. Like, oh, well, this is just the way it is kind of thing. And I think that astrology does kind of show people that they have more power, like, no, you don't have to just sit there and take it. No, it's not necessarily your fault, and I think that that's a huge thing too, especially for folks who might not have like access to certain resources, or access to certain things that other people might have more access to. And I think it's important to recognize it's kind of goes both ways of kind of saying like, it's not your fault that you're in this position or where you are, but you also have some leverage. Like the stars can show you like, there is a way that you can change things, or there's a way that you can like navigate out of this space or navigate into better spaces. Right. And I think that historically, the reason why astrology has lasted this long, right? Because it's been around for centuries. It's an ancient, practice, and it keeps coming back in waves because I think it's a thing. One, it works. There's something actually to this, but I think it also has to do with like how much it gives people in terms of like being like the masters of like their own domain.
I agree with every bit of that. And I love what April is saying over here, that it's not your fault, but it is your current reality.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, like astrology does a great job of like giving you some context of what it is that you may be experiencing. And I think you're right too. It gives you options where you may not have like totally grasped that you had options, right? It gives you some options. And I think language too for dealing with whatever it is that you may be undergoing in any given moment.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so to wrap this up, I would love to know if you see anything on the horizon that bosses should be considering, like what is happening in the planets over the next couple of weeks or months, if you're not too afraid to share. I'm also like a little afraid of even asking this question, but almost if you could give us like maybe a little horoscope, like what should we be looking for? What may be happening? Should we hide?
Hide. Oh, goodness gracious. I would say, so we still have quite a lot of gnarly sky to get through between now and the end of the year. When we get to November, eclipse season is going to start up again, and eclipse season between November, there's a big eclipse on November 30th, and there's another eclipse on December 14th. Those Gemini Sag eclipses that I was talking about. And eclipse season in general can be very anxiety inducing. It can also drain your energy because the sun and the moon are getting together for kind of like a big cosmic download, if you will, where the energy is just really charged, and the reason why is because there's a big change and transition that's coming through. And so I would say, with all the changes that are coming through and the twists and turns, the retrogrades and, trying to navigate it all, I think this is really a time, like I said, to not push too hard right now. Do what you can. I would also advise maybe scheduling, if you can, maybe scheduling some time off around the eclipses, just to kind of give yourself a break. Like I blocked out like that week, for both, because I'm I'm getting eclipsed. So, if when your chart gets heavily eclipsed, it does zap your energy. So, it's good to kind of take off, that week or those couple of days that surround an eclipse. So November 30th, mark your calendar, eclipse in Gemini. It's a lunar eclipse, full moon eclipse. So that's really a lot of energy coming in. And then on December 14th is a solar eclipse, a new moon in Sagittarius. So try to take it easy. This is a good time for doing things that have meditative quality, or therapeutic quality to it, because anytime we talk about eclipses in Gemini and Sag, they tend to really fry the nervous system. So try to take it as slow as possible. Use these delays or these roadblocks as like the breaks that you need. You use them as the moments to kind of take a moment and chill. But I will say that in terms of harnessing the energy and ways that you can use it, this is a great time for studying new things, learning new skills, because anytime we talk about Gemini and Sag, it's the axis of learning and knowledge. So Sagittarius is associated with travel, and we can't really travel right now, but we can learn. So, this is a great time to sign up for classes. It's a great time to brush up on your skills or to learn some new skills that you can add to your tool set. This is a great time for connecting and networking and meeting new people and, building your community and building teams, and collaborating with folks. This is a great time for that. And it's also a great time to just like I said, to kind of be flexible. So, you can have your game plan and you can have your vision for things that you want to see happen, but try not to be so attached to it or so fixated on it that you don't make room for some of the other things that might come in, because it could actually be things that could actually get you to where you want to go quicker. So. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I hope that everyone takes that, listen to it, embrace it, see and find the opportunity, and otherwise rest.
Yes, please do. Yes, I have 4 retrograde planets in my chart, so that's why I'm always telling people I'm the ministry of rest.
Same. I think you and I need to do a chart comparison. I think there might be a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I love that. Well, wonderful. Mecca, where can people find more about you?
Sure. You can find me on my website at mylifecreated.com. My book is there. My book, Astrology for Happiness and Success, is everywhere that books are sold. I have my line of coloring books out, the cosmic coloring books. Same thing, everywhere books are sold. I'm on Instagram at One Mechanism, on Twitter at The Mechanism. But if you go to my website, everything is there. You can just find all the links that you need.
Perfect. And my last question for you, Mecca, what makes you feel most boss?
What makes me feel most boss? When
I love it when people giggle like that before they tell me. I can't wait to hear.
I think okay, so we started out talking about my earring choices, and when I'm looking good, that makes me feel boss. That makes me feel really confident. I'm a Leo rising, so I need the fashions.
It's in your chart.
It's in my chart. I'm just living my chart out. So yeah, that's what makes me feel boss.
I love that. Thank you so much, Mecca, for coming and hanging out with us.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. And thank you to everyone for listening in, and for the compliments, and for following. Thank you. I'm very, very touched.
And there you have it, our first dive into the story of an astrologer boss. If you've loved it, there's more where this came from. Hear more from Mecca and my squad of boss experts, including Bridget Esselmont of Biddy Tarot, educator and tarot deck creator Pamela Chen, and author and editor Tasha Harrison, and the replays of the Guided by Intuition gathering, available in the Clubhouse tier of the Being Boss community in just a few days from this episode airing. You'll also be introduced to community members Carrie Hess, designer of the Spark Tarot deck, and Alexandria Rollet, astrologer and human design expert, who will even be giving a free human design webinar to the community in just a few weeks. You can learn more and join in at beingboss.club/community, where we have all the fun. That's beingboss.club/community. And until next time, do the work, be boss.
Yeah.